The cantina on Nexus Prime buzzed with the low Hammervillian conversations, but all fell silent as Commander Vextar of the Hegemony Fleet began his tale. His reptilian features bore the scars of countless battles, and his voice carried the weight of terrible memories. "You want to know about the humans," he rasped, his scaled fingers gripping a glass of fermented nectar. "You think you understand war because you've conquered star systems. But until you faced them, you know nothing." The mixed crowd of alien species leaned forward, crystalline traders, gaseous nebula dwellers, and insectoid hive representatives, all eager to hear why the mighty Galactic Hegemony had sued for a peace. A single primitive world. Vextaris yellow. I scanned the room, taking in the eager faces of beings who had never truly understood fear. The air recyclers hummed overhead, mixing the atmosphere to accommodate dozens of different respiratory systems. Blue smoke from Avorthan's breathing apparatus curled lazily toward the ceiling, while the gentle chimming of a silicon-based lifeform provided an eerie soundtrack to his words. "It began 3 cycles ago," Vextar continued, his voice dropping to draw his audience closer. "Earth was just another blue marble in our expansion path. Initial scans showed soft-skinned bipeds with short lifespans and crude technology. The Council deemed them suitable for either slavery or elimination. A younger crystalline being, her faceted surface gleaming with curiosity, interrupted. But surely your intelligence networks had studied them more thoroughly. The hegemony never moves without complete data." Vextar's laugh was bitter, like the sound of grinding metal. "Oh, we studied them. We watched their primitive chemical rockets struggle to reach their moon. We observed their crude nuclear weapons barely powerful enough to crack a small asteroid. Their fastest ships couldn't even achieve light speed. By our calculations, they were at least 500 years behind our most basic technology." The cantina's lighting dimmed slightly as the station rotated, casting long shadows across the gathered aliens. Vextar's scarred hide seemed to ripple in the changing light, each mark telling its own story of violence and survival. "We saw their wars," he continued, his claws drumming against the metal table. "Thousands of years of conflict, always fighting among themselves. Humans killing humans over resources, territory, ideology. We thought this made them weak, divided. How could a species that couldn't even unite their own world stand against the combined might of 17 star systems, a gaseous being near?" The back of the room pulsed with nervous energy. "What changed your assessment?" "The day we realized we weren't looking at their weakness," Vextar said, his inner eyelids flickering. "We were looking at their training." The silence that followed was profound. Even the usual sounds of the cantina, the clink of glasses, the whisper of atmospheric processes, the distant hum of the station's massive engines seemed to fade into nothing. Every human war, every conflict in their bloody history, was preparation for the day someone would try to take their world from them. While we perfected our technology over millennia of peace, they perfected something far more dangerous. He paused, letting his words sink in. They perfected the art of refusing to die. An insectoid delegate, her compound eyes reflecting the cantina's lights like 1,000 tiny stars, clicked nervously. "Surely you exaggerate. No species can survive on determination alone." Vextar reached into his uniform and withdrew a small device. Placing it on the table, the holographic display showed a blue-green world spinning slowly in the darkness of space. "This is Earth as we first saw it. Beautiful, isn't it? Peaceful. We detected no orbital defense platforms, no weapon satellites, no shield generators. Just a quiet little world full of creatures who seemed more interested in growing food and building cities than preparing for a war." The hologram shifted, showing closer images of human cities, towering structures of glass and steel, green spaces filled with vegetation, waterways teeming with life. It looked like paradise compared to the heavily fortified world's most galactic species called home. We couldn't have been more wrong. Vextar whispered. Every one of those cities was a fortress waiting to be awakened. Every human citizen was a soldier who simply hadn't been given their orders yet. Every peaceful farmer, teacher, artist, or shopkeeper was a potential warrior who would die before they let strangers decide their fate. The hologram flickered and changed, showing orbital scans and energy readings. Our deep scans revealed something our initial surveys had missed. Hidden beneath those peaceful cities were networks of tunnels, underground facilities, emergency supply caches. These humans had been preparing for alien invasion for decades, maybe centuries. They called it science fiction, but it was really strategic planning. He paused, his inner eyelids flickering with remembered pain. We were so terribly wrong. The invasion fleet was magnificent. Vextar's voice grew distant, his yellow eyes staring into the swirling patterns of his drink. 300 warships from 5 different species, enough firepower to crack a moon. We expected surrender broadcasts within hours of entering their system. The cantina's patrons leaned closer as Vextar's claws began to scratch rhythmically against the metal table, leaving thin grooves in the surface. The sound was hypnotic, like a death march played on alien instruments. I commanded the forward Scout Division 12 heavy cruisers that could have conquered most civilized worlds single-handedly. As we dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their solar system, our sensors immediately detected their pathetic defense fleet, barely 200 vessels. Most of them converted cargo haulers and mining ships. Their biggest warship was smaller than our escort frigates. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. The idea of such a mismatched battle seemed almost comical to beings who had witnessed the hegemony's unstoppable war machine crush. Resistance across the galaxy, Admiral Kethavel, my superior, opened a communication channel to their homeworld. Standard procedure demand immediate surrender. Offer terms for peaceful integration into the hegemony. We gave them 1 planetary rotation to consider our generous offer. Vextar's mandibles clicked with dark amusement. The response came. Back in less than an hour, the alien commander activated a small recording device. Static filled the air. Then a clear human voice spoke in perfectly translated galactic standard. This is Admiral Deho of the Earth Defense Force Pacific Fleet. Your terms are rejected. Earth stands free. That was it. Vextar continued. No negotiations. No pleas for mercy. No desperate attempts to buy time. Just a simple statement that would cost millions of lives on both sides. The gaseous being near the back pulsed with curiosity. Surely they attempted some form of diplomacy. Even the most primitive species usually. Oh, they did. Vextar interrupted, his scarred hide rippling with remembered tension. But not in any way we expected. Instead of begging for their lives, they started broadcasting something else entirely. Music, stories, images of their world, their families, their children, their cities. They wanted us to know exactly what we were trying to destroy. He paused, letting the implication sink in. They weren't trying to convince us to spare them. They were showing us what they were willing to die for. The first engagement came sooner than anyone expected, as the invasion fleet moved past Earth's moon. Long-range sensors detected movement from the human defense perimeter. What looked like a retreating formation suddenly accelerated directly toward the hegemony's lead dreadnoughts. Admiral Deho commanded their largest vessel, a converted mining platform they called the Soul's Pride. Our intelligence estimated it could barely survive a single direct hit from our main batteries. Instead of running, he led a charge straight into our formation. Vextar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I watched through the tactical display as his ship took hit after hit from our plasma cannons. Hull plates peeling away like flower petals, atmosphere bleeding into space, secondary explosions rippling across his superstructure. Any sane commander would have ordered evacuation. The insectoid delegate's compound eyes glittered. But he didn't. He accelerated, Vexstar said simply, as his ship died round him. Admiral Deho pushed his engines past red line and aimed. His burning wreck at our flagship, 2 kilometers of dying metal and desperate humans, moving at combat speed toward the pride of our fleet. The cantina had grown so quiet that the only sound was the distant hum of the station's life. Support. Systems. Even the atmospheric processors seemed to hold their breath. The impact tore through 3 decks of our dreadnought. The explosion killed 800 of our finest warriors and crippled our primary command vessel. But that wasn't the worst part. Vexstar's claws stopped scratching, leaving deep grooves in the table. The worst part was what we heard on their open communications before the collision. He activated another recording. Through the static and interference, a human voice could be heard. Calm despite the chaos of battle. Soul's pride to all Earth. Vessels, we're going in. Remember us to our families. Remember us to the stars. That was Admiral Deho's final transmission. Vexstar continued. No screams of pain. No curses against his enemies. No desperate pleas for rescue. Just a simple request to be remembered. The alien commander's voice grew harder as he described the battle that followed. Human fighters, outnumbered 20-1. Dove into formations of hegemony interceptors with no regard for their own survival, pilots with call signs like Ghost, and thunder guided their burning craft into enemy vessels while laughing over open comm channels. Captain Jiwoo commanded a squadron of 12 fighters against our entire carrier group. I watched her ship take direct hits from our point defense systems. Saw her engines fail and her weapons go offline. Her fighter was a flying wreck, held together by emergency patches and pure determination. The crystalline delegate's faceted surface dimmed with distress. Surely they were desperate. Fighting with such recklessness suggests. That's what we thought. Vexstar laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the cantina's metal walls, until we intercepted their communications. Captain Jiwoo, a human female barely into her 3rd decade, spoke to her remaining pilots as plasma fire tore through her fighter's hull. She said, "Today we write our names in the stars. Make every shot count. Make every life matter." And they did exactly that. He continued, his voice heavy with unwilling respect. They fought harder as they died. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as missiles. When their ships were destroyed, they transmitted targeting data to their surviving comrades. They turned their deaths into weapons more powerful than anything in our arsenal. The battle for Earth's outer system lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the hegemony had lost 47 vessels and thousands of experienced warriors. The human defense fleet was completely destroyed. Not a single Earth ship survived the engagement. We had won, Vexstar concluded, his yellow eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lighting. But as we counted our losses and prepared for the next phase of invasion, we realized something that would haunt us for the rest of the war. The humans hadn't been trying to win that battle. They had been teaching us a lesson about the price of taking their world, and we were too arrogant to understand it. The ground invasion of their colony worlds taught us the true meaning of human warfare. Vexstar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper on New Soul. We faced Colonel Timon and his garrison of 5,000 humans against our force of 50,000. The cantina had grown completely silent now, even the background hum of machinery seeming to quiet in respect for the tale. The alien commander's scarred hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink, the fermented nectar casting strange shadows in the dim light. New Seoul was supposed to be our easy victory. He began, his yellow eyes distant with memory. A farming colony with minimal defenses, established only 30 years before our arrival. Intelligence reports showed agricultural centers, research facilities, and civilian settlements. No military installations, no weapon factories, no orbital defense platforms, just farmers and scientists trying to make a new life among the stars. A silicon-based being near the bar chimed softly, its crystalline structure resonating with curiosity. How many of your forces did you deploy for such a simple target? 50,000 warriors. Vexstar replied, his mandibles clicking with bitter amusement. The largest ground force the hegemony had ever assembled for a single colony world. We came with siege mechs that could level mountains, plasma artillery that could melt through reinforced bunkers, and air support that had crushed rebellions across the galaxy. Against 5,000 humans armed with farming tools and homemade weapons, the alien commander activated a holographic projector, showing aerial views of New Seoul before the invasion. Rolling fields of golden grain stretched to the horizon, interrupted by small settlements and the occasional research facility. It looked peaceful, almost serene. Colonel Taimin commanded their defense force, if you could call it that. A retired soldier who had come to New Seoul to grow vegetables and raise his grandchildren. His army consisted of security guards, local militia, and volunteers who had never seen real combat. Our tactical computers gave them a 0% chance of survival. The hologram shifted to show the initial landing zones, marked with red indicators where the hegemony forces had established their beachheads. We came down in 3 waves, expecting to secure major population centers within hours, standard protocol for pacifying primitive colonies. Vexstar's claws began that familiar scratching against the table surface. The first surprise came when our dropships landed. The fields we had chosen for our landing zones erupted like volcanoes. Farmer Byung-ho had spent weeks converting his irrigation systems into improvised mine networks. What should have been soft earth became killing fields filled with homemade explosives and modified agricultural chemicals. The gaseous delegate pulsed nervously. Surely your armor protected your troops from such primitive weapons. Our exoskeletons could deflect plasma bolts and resist small arms fire, Vexstar admitted. But they weren't designed to handle fertilizer bombs mixed with scrap metal and timed with mechanical precision. Byung-ho had turned his knowledge of soil chemistry into expertise in battlefield engineering. Every field, every irrigation ditch, every grain silo became a weapon. The alien commander's voice grew quieter as he described the urban combat that followed. When we reached the settlements, we found something even more terrifying than improvised explosives. We found a population that refused to be conquered. The hologram showed narrow streets between modest buildings. But Vexstar's description painted a different picture entirely. Teacher Mi Young had converted her school into a communications hub. Children as young as 10 years old coordinated our movements to resistance fighters throughout the city. They used their educational networks, their recreational channels, even their entertainment systems to track our forces and relay tactical information. A crystalline trader's surface flickered with distress. They used their own children as combatants, not as fighters, Vexstar corrected quickly, as something far more dangerous as hope. Those children became the eyes and ears of the entire resistance. When we moved a patrol through Sector 7, a 12-year-old would tap out a message on a learning tablet. When we established a checkpoint at the Market District, teenage students would update their social networks with coded warnings. Every human became a soldier, every building a fortress, every communication device a weapon of war. The alien commander paused, his breathing shallow as he recalled memories that still haunted his sleep cycles. But it wasn't their tactics that Brogasit was their spirit. Lieutenant Haywan was leading an evacuation convoy when our strike force surrounded them. She was wounded, bleeding from multiple plasma burns. But she carried her fallen commander 6 kilometers through enemy. Fired to their evacuation point, she could have saved herself. He continued, his voice thick with an emotion his alien audience couldn't quite identify. Our forces were focused on military targets, not fleeing civilians. But she wouldn't leave him behind. Not to save him, he was already dead, but because she said over and over, "No human fights alone. No human dies alone." The insectoid representative clicked nervously, her compound eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lighting. How did they achieve such coordination without centralized command? Our intelligence suggested their communication systems had been disabled in the first wave. That's just it. Vextar's eyes glowed with an emotion, and the aliens couldn't identify something between respect and fear. They didn't need central command. They didn't need orders from headquarters or strategic planning from their officers. Every human seemed to understand instinctively what their role should be in the larger battle. He activated another section of the hologram, showing tactical data from the final day of the New Soul campaign. Sergeant Somin and her squad of militia volunteers were trapped in a supply depot, surrounded by full companies of our best shock troops. Any rational commander would have ordered surrender to save their people's lives. The hologram showed heat signatures moving through a complex building layout. Dozens of hegemony forces converging on a handful of human defenders. Instead, Sergeant Somin saw an opportunity. The depot contained ammunition and fuel supplies that our forces needed for the next phase of operations. She made her choice in seconds, knowing her comrades would understand. The explosion took out the entire supply complex and 100 of our warriors, Vextar concluded quietly. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was what she transmitted before detonating their ammunition cache. "Tell my daughter, I kept my promise. Tell her the stars still shine." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the station's massive engines. When Vextar spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on every being in the cantina. That's when we realized we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting an idea that had taken root in every human heart, the idea that some things are worth any sacrifice, and that freedom is worth more than life itself. By the second year, we realized we weren't fighting an army, we were fighting an idea, Vextar said, his voice heavy with something approaching or general. Don Hyan didn't just command troops. He commanded the hope of an entire species. The alien commander's scarred hands moved across his body, tracing the deep grooves and burn marks that covered his reptilian hide like a map of battles fought and barely survived. Each scar told a story, but his audience could see that some wounds went deeper than flesh. The hegemony had conquered 47 star systems before we encountered humanity. He continued, his yellow eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lighting. We had perfected the art of breaking resistance, psychological warfare, superior technology, overwhelming force. We knew exactly how to crush the spirit of any species foolish enough to oppose us. A nervous clicking came from the insectoid. Delegate as Vextar activated his holographic display again. This time it showed a massive space station orbiting Earth, bristling with weapon systems and defense platforms. This was Fortress Aegis, humanity's primary orbital defense platform. Captain Unity commanded 200 humans against an entire siege fleet, over 800 vessels designed specifically for breaking fortified positions. Our tactical computers estimated the station would fall within 72 hours of concentrated bombardment. The hologram rotated slowly, showing the elegant lines of human engineering. Unlike the brutal, angular designs favored by most galactic species, the human station seemed to flow like water frozen in space, beautiful even as it prepared for a war. It held for 6 months. Vextar said quietly, 6 months of constant assault. From weapons that could vaporize asteroids, we threw everything at that station plasma bombardments that could melt continents, antimatter torpedoes that bent space itself. Seed mechs the size of small cities. Nothing worked. The gaseous being near the back pulsed with confusion. How is that possible? No defensive structure can withstand such concentrated firepower indefinitely. Because they kept changing the rules, Vextar replied, his mandibles clicking with grudging admiration every time we developed a new strategy. Captain Yunji and her crew found a way to counter it. When we knocked out their primary shield generators, they rigged the station's life support systems to create localized energy barriers. When we destroyed their main weapons, they turned their cargo bays into missile launchers using spare parts. And ingenuity, the alien commander gestured to a particularly deep scar running across his chest, the tissue still discolored after all this time. These marks, from Corporal Yang-Su, a human engineer who had been defending a maintenance section of the station for 18 hours straight. Our boarding parties had been trying to take that sector for 3 days that control the power distribution for the entire Western defense grid. His voice grew quieter as he recalled the encounter. When we finally breached their barricades, we found him alone, working frantically at a control console. He had a punctured lung from shrapnel. His left arm was shattered from a plasma burst, and he'd been bleeding for hours. Any rational being would have surrendered or collapsed from their injuries. The crystalline trader's surface dimmed with anticipated dread, but he didn't surrender. He looked up when we entered the room. Vextar continued, his scarred fingers tracing patterns on the table. Blood was running down his face. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear and determined. He looked right into my eyes and said something I'll never forget. My children will remember this day. The alien commander paused, letting the weight of those words settle over his audience. Then he pulled the pins on 3 grenades he had strapped to his chest. The explosion took out half my squad and damaged the power grid so badly that it took us another week to restore full function to that section. A silicon-based being chimed nervously. Surely such desperate actions were the exception rather than the rule. That's what we hoped. Vextar laughed bitterly. But every day brought new examples of human determination that defied all logic. When we finally breached Fortress Aegis's main defenses after 6 months of siege, we expected to find a broken command crew ready to surrender. The hologram shifted to show the interior of the station's command center. A circular room filled with tactical displays and communication equipment. Even in the projection, scorch marks from plasma fire were visible along the walls. We found Captain Yunji still at her post, calling out coordinates and targeting data, even as our boarding parties fought through the corridors around her. Half the command center was open to space. The life support systems had failed ours earlier, and most of her equipment had been destroyed by weapons fire. But she never stopped working. Vextar's voice cracked slightly as he described the scene. She died entering targeting information for weapons that had been destroyed, calling out coordinates for evacuation ships that had been vaporized hours before. Her fingers were still moving across dead control surfaces when we reached her position. She never stopped fighting. Never stopped believing her people would find a way to survive. The cantina had grown so quiet that the only sound was the distant whisper of atmospheric processes cycling alien air through the station's ventilation systems. When Vextar spoke again, his voice carried a reverence that his audience had never heard from a hegemony commander. And they did find a way. He added quietly, every time we thought we'd broken them, they found new reserves of strength we didn't know existed. Every victory we claimed came at a cost that made us question whether winning was worth the price we were paying. The alien commander activated another section of his display, showing medical facilities and field hospitals. Medic Kyangsuran, a field hospital in the ruins of New Tokyo. When our forces overran his position, we expected him to surrender medical personnel or traditionally non-combatants in galactic warfare. The hologram showed a human figure moving between wounded soldiers, both human and alien, providing treatment without discrimination instead. We found him treating our wounded alongside his own people. He saved the lives of dozens of my warriors, working tirelessly to heal injuries caused by his own side's weapons. But here's what made it truly terrifying. Vexstar continued, his scales rippling with remembered confusion. After spending 12 hours treating our wounded, he picked up a rifle and returned to fighting. Their compassion made them stronger, not weaker. They could show mercy to their enemies and still possess the will to kill them when necessary. The insectoid delegate's compound eyes glittered with something approaching fear. How do you fight an enemy that refuses to hate you? You can't. Vexstar replied simply. That's when we realized we weren't just fighting for a territory or resources. We were fighting against an idea that had infected every human heart, the idea that some principles are worth any sacrifice, and that showing mercy to your enemies doesn't make you weak. It makes you terrifying. The end came not with a great battle, but with a simple realization. Vexstar concluded, his voice hollow with exhaustion. After 3 years of war, we'd conquered no human worlds. We'd destroyed dozens of their cities, killed millions of their people, but never once had a human population surrendered. The alien commander's claws had worn deep grooves in the metal table during his tale, and now he traced them absently as he gathered his thoughts. Round him, the cantina's diverse collection of beings waited in absolute silence, their various forms of breathing the only sound in the recycled air. By the third year, our war machine was beginning to crack. He continued, his scarred hide rippling with remembered tension. The hegemony had never fought a conflict that lasted more than a few months. Our logistics were designed for quick conquests, not prolonged campaigns against an enemy that refused to break. Vexstar activated his holographic display one final time, showing star charts marked with red indicators. These were our targets: 47 human colony worlds scattered across 12 star systems. We had successfully destroyed the infrastructure on 31 of them. Entire cities reduced to rubble, spaceports melted to slag, industrial centers turned to smoking craters. The display zoomed in on specific worlds, showing before and after images of human settlements. The destruction was absolute where once thriving communities had existed. Only wasteland remained. But destroying their cities didn't break their will, Vexstar said quietly. The survivors simply moved underground, into the wilderness, into the ruins themselves. They kept fighting with whatever they could find. A farmer on Kepler-4 thought to be used mining charges to collapse a mountain pass, trapping an entire mechanized division for 3 weeks. A teacher on Proxima Centauri organized refugee children to sabotage our supply lines using toys and school supplies, the gaseous being near the back pulsed with nervous energy. Surely your superior technology gave you decisive advantages. Technology means nothing when your enemy treats every defeat as a learning opportunity, Vexstar replied, his mandibles clicking with bitter amusement. We developed new tactics, and within days the humans would find counters. We'd deploy new weapons, and they'd figure out weaknesses we didn't know existed. They turned their entire species into a research project focused on one goal: making our lives impossible. The alien commander's voice grew heavier as he described the final phase of the war. The breaking point came when High Command ordered the complete sterilization of the Tau Ceti system. 4 colony worlds, 18 million human civilians, all to be eliminated as an example to the rest of their species. The hologram showed massive dreadnoughts moving into position round a blue-green world. Their weapon systems charging for planetary bombardment. Admiral Sunho of their home fleet was waiting for us with a force of barely 200 ships converted freighters, mining vessels. Even luxury yachts fitted with improvised weapons. Against our armada of 3,000 vessels, Vextar paused, his inner eyelids flickering with the memory. But instead of attacking, he opened a communication channel. Not to negotiate terms or beg for mercy. He sent us a message that changed everything. The alien commander activated an audio recording, and Admiral Sunho's voice filled the cantinacom, measured. Utterly without fear, this is Admiral Sunho of the Earth Defense Force Home Fleet. We are human. We choose our own destiny. Come if you must. But know that every star in this galaxy will burn out before we kneel. The recording continued with background chatter from human ship crews. And the aliens in the cantina could hear something that chilled them to their core's laughter. The humans were laughing as they prepared to face impossible odds. That's when we understood. Vextar said softly, we weren't fighting for a territory or resources anymore. We were fighting to prove that the universe worked the way we thought. It did. That superior force always wins, that overwhelming technology always triumphs, that every species can be broken if you apply enough pressure. The silence stretched until one of the gaseous beings whispered, "What did you do?" "We withdrew," Vextar said simply, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on every being in the cantina. Not because we couldn't when we had the firepower to turn their entire world to glass. To sterilize every human colony, to erase their species from existence. But because we finally understood the true cost of victory. He stood slowly, his movement careful and deliberate, like an old warrior carrying the weight of too many battles. Destroying humanity would have required us to become something we weren't prepared to be. We would have had to kill every human man, woman, and child in the galaxy. Because as long as even one survived, they would have kept fighting, kept hoping, kept believing that freedom was worth any price. The alien commander moved toward the cantina's exit, his scarred form casting long shadows in the dim lighting. The peace treaty wasn't a surrender, it was our admission that there are forces in this universe more powerful than plasma cannons and antimatter bombs, the human spirit. Their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to pay any price for freedom. These things cannot be conquered because they exist in the realm of ideas, not matter. As he reached the doorway, Vextar paused and turned back to his audience. The hegemony still possesses the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Our technology is still superior. Our numbers still overwhelming. But we learned something. That changed us forever. Victory without honor is just another form of defeat. His yellow eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each alien present. You ask why the hegemony fear them. Because they showed us something we'd forgotten in our millennia of conquest. That some fights are worth everything, and some people would rather die free than live as slaves. They reminded us that being strong enough to destroy something doesn't mean you should, and that the greatest victories are sometimes the wars you choose not to fight. The cantina's atmospheric processes hummed softly as Vextar delivered his final words. The humans are still out there, still building their worlds, still raising their children, still believing in things worth dying for. They're not plotting revenge or preparing for another war. They're just living free, which is all they ever wanted. He stepped toward the exit, then paused one last time. Pray to whatever gods you worship that humanity never has reason to remind us of these lessons again. Because if they do, I fear not even the hegemony will survive the teaching. As the alien commander disappeared into the crowd outside, his Footsteps echoing in the station's corridors, the cantina remained silent. The diverse collection of beings sat motionless, each lost in their own thoughts about a species that had redefined what it meant to be truly. Powerful, the gaseous delegate was the first to speak, its voice barely a whisper. Do you think they know? Do the humans understand what they've done? A crystalline trader's surface flickered with uncertain light. Perhaps that's what makes them so terrifying. They didn't set out to change the galaxy. They just refused to give up being themselves. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the station's massive engines carrying them all through the darkness between stars. In that darkness, somewhere among the scattered lights of human colonies, ordinary people continue their lives, unaware that their simple refusal to surrender had rewritten the rules of galactic civilization. The cantina's patrons dispersed slowly, each carrying with them a new understanding of courage, determination, and the price of freedom. They would spread Vextar's tale throughout the galaxy, ensuring that the lesson of humanity's war would never be forgotten. And in the depths of space, the human colonies continued to grow, their lights burning bright against the cosmic dark, a testament to the indomitable spirit that had faced down the galaxy's greatest empire and emerged victorious through the simple act of refusing to kneel. ***, the end ***.